All right. Well, this is your first week with us. This is a good week to join us because we are kicking off a brand new series, a 5-part series. But before we get into it, listen. If you'll be here for the next 5 Sundays, those 5 days will be the best 5 days of your entire life. All right, pause for a second. You know what you're feeling right now? Doubt. Now, I think you know I want the best for you, but probably the next 5 Sundays are not gonna be the best days of your life. But we're gonna spend some time talking about doubt, right? Doubt is, by definition, it is the feeling of uncertainty. It's like the I'm not sure, the maybe nots, the what ifs, you know? And in the church world, there's a lot of doubt. It comes in all different shapes and sizes, and we handle it in all different ways. You know, I remember when I was growing up, I just, for a while, for years, I just was not into church. I didn't believe any of it. I didn't want to be there. My parents would force me to go to church and get all buttoned up, nice, you know, no jeans, and had to look all clean and whatever. And we would go, and then there would be a part in the service where we'd all have to stand up, and we'd start singing. And I remember just being there and being annoyed and looking around, watching people sing, and just thinking, are they serious? Like, is this for real? Have you ever been there? Maybe you were there like 3 minutes ago. Doubt. And at different points in my life, like there were some times where I really wanted to get it. You know, and I'd hear something, someone would say something to me, and I'd be like, yes, like that's me, I get that. I believe this. But then I would hear other parts, you know, like other parts of what these people believe. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I can take that. You know, I'll take this, but I don't know about this part. Like that's hard for me to accept. But because I was into part of it, the other part, I would just kind of like just suppress it and honestly just pretend. Like, okay, when we're in the Christian group with the church, people will be like, yep, amen. We believe that, you know, the guy who was swallowed by the whale, Jonah, you know, and 3 days later just came out, boom, fine, like Geppetto. I believe that happens all the time, right? You know, and the talking snake in the story with Adam, yep, totally. And really, like, I find myself just pretending with some of it, but kind of wanting the rest of it to be true. There was this nagging doubt. Have you been there? And then there have been other times where, like later on in life, in more recent years, where I've been doing this for a while. Maybe you have too. Maybe you've been in the church since you've grown up. And you're all alone, in your car, in the shower, at your desk. And all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, this doubt just like creeps in. Like, what if this is all wrong? What if it's not real? Doubt, that feeling of uncertainty, it comes in all different forms, hits us in all different ways. And it's hard to know what to do with it. You know, doubt, like if you step back from the church world, doubt is a natural thing. In fact, it's even a good thing, you know? If you got a daughter and some character shows up one day and wants to take your daughter out and you're not sure about him, you should doubt. That might be a good thing, right? You know, if you got to save a princess on the other side of a cliff and there's a rope bridge and it's shaky, you know, and you've got your doubts, there's a feeling of uncertainty, is that thing going to hold me? You should doubt that. Right? Doubt can be a good thing. But in the context of church and God and Jesus, religion, doubt, it gets hairy. And the emotions that come with it are often very uncomfortable. You know, a lot of us will feel like guilty for having doubts or shame. Like this feeling like I'm never gonna be the one who believes. Maybe that guy can and he can just accept all of it. She can, but I'm not. I'm like never gonna be there. Maybe it's discouraging. You know, maybe even trying a long time. But these nagging feelings of doubt just kind of keep sneaking their way in. And it feels heavy. And at times it can feel hopeless when it happens again and again and again. Or maybe it just makes you angry. You know, maybe you're not totally bought in and you're looking on like in from the outside like I was when I was younger. Like looking like, are they serious? Like, is this for real? Are we just all supposed to play this game? Like it really can bring up all these difficult emotions. And so what do we do? Like, what do we do with doubt? That's what we're going to talk about over the next couple weeks. How to handle, how to see, feel, approach, and deal with our doubts. I may not put any one specific doubt to rest for you, but my hope, what we're setting out to do here is give you tools to handle your doubts when they rise to the surface. If you're someone who considers themselves a follower of Jesus, a person of faith, this is how you handle your doubts, whether they come like flying in out of nowhere or they just slowly creep in. This is how to handle your doubts. And if you're not someone who believes any of this, like maybe you're just here right now because someone threatened you or promised you lunch, or she wouldn't go on a date with you, but you could go to church with her, you know, whatever, but you're not bought into it. What I'd suggest, and I could be totally wrong, but what I suggest is that maybe understanding how we believe God wants us to handle our doubts, maybe that could be enough to pull you in the direction of faith. And so the question is like, what do we do? What do we do with doubts? How do we handle, how do we see, feel, approach, and deal with our doubts? So there was this guy like very early on, right about the time of Jesus, but actually a little bit before Jesus. His name was John. Now, this isn't John like the disciple, the student of Jesus who wrote the book of John and 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, not that John. There's another John. We call him John the Baptist. And he wasn't like a Baptist, like, you know, in a religious sense, like Presbyterian, John the Methodist, or John the Catholic. They called him John the Baptist because he baptized people, and that they just named people by what they did. I guess they didn't figure out how like useful last names were gonna be, right? So John the Baptist. Now, when you picture John the Baptist, he is like this spiritual rock star, right? Like he checks all the boxes. From the time that he was young, before he was born even, his parents believed and apparently had heard from an angel that he was gonna be great. Like he was gonna be in a class all on his own. And so growing up, they prepared him for what his job would be. He believed, and they believed, that it would be his job to get everyone ready for the arrival of Jesus. In fact, he was actually Jesus' cousin. He was just a little bit older than him, but they were cousins. Fun fact, right? And so he dedicates his whole life to this. John is like the anti-doubt character. From day one or day zero, like 9 months before day one, John's on board, whether he realizes it or not. And He even believed, and this is crazy if you think about this. Like, we have the Bible. If you don't know, it's the New Testament and the Old Testament. The Old Testament was around when Jesus was around. It was his Bible. John had the Old Testament in his Bible. He didn't call it the Old Testament because there was no new one, so it wasn't considered old. It was just their thing. And for him, like, check this out. He believed that there was a verse in his Bible that was about him. Like, someone would come and prepare the way. And he's like, that's me. And he would tell people, that's me. I think that's pretty gutsy to be like, I'm that guy in there. But he believed it, and so did other people. In fact, he went out in the wilderness, like spent some time preparing, came back from the wilderness. He looked crazy. You know, if you know the Liver King, he looking like the Liver King. If you don't know the Liver King, like just think the Geico caveman guy. Just came out looking nuts. He wore animal skins. He ate bugs and wild honey, which is actually an Old Testament reference to someone named Elijah, but that's kind of a different story. He just came out looking really different. And he had this message, and people were drawn to him by the multitudes. Hundreds and hundreds of people. And this is where he got the name John the Baptizer, because they would come to him. He's like, you need to get your life around, change your life. Use the word repent, which is to change your mind, change direction. He's like, and he's dunking them underwater by the hundreds, by the thousands. In fact, the person who wrote about this afterwards just says everyone went, all of them. All the people, they all had some kind of experience with John. Everyone knew who he was. He's like the man. In fact, okay, this is the last fun fact about John. He believed God told him specifically, showed him specifically that Jesus was the one that they were waiting for. Specifically, John, that's the one right there. You see him? That's the one. So things are going pretty well for John. Well, he's so bold. He's so, he's got this remarkable career, from a ministry standpoint. Everyone wants to hear from him. Eventually, he approaches the king, King Herod, which was it was a political position to be in king, but he was the king of the Jews, so it was also kind of a religious role as well, which is why Herod went after him. And he's like, look, the stuff that you're doing is not cool. It's not okay. If you're going to represent us as a people, that's a problem. You can't be doing what you're doing. And Herod, being not cool, decides he's going to put John in prison. Now, the stories that John grew up reading had people going in prison all the time and losing their lives even all the time because of what they believed. It's like their way of going out with a bang. If you were with us for our throwback series, you might remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were threatened. They were going to be thrown into the furnace. And they were like, bring it on. We don't care. And so John now is being thrown in prison. And you'd think okay, this is going to be the thing for him. He's going to go out with a bang. It makes sense. He's had a fantastic career. Now he's going to lose his life for what he believes. And so he's surrounded by his prison walls. He's in jail. And he's still got followers, people that are still like, we're John's guys. We're with him. And somehow he gets in touch with these followers, and he sends them to Jesus with a question. Here's the question. It says, when John, who was in prison at the time for what he did to the king, what he said to the king, when he heard about the deeds of the Messiah. That word is used intentionally. It means literally the chosen one or the anointed one. And when he heard about what Jesus was out doing, he sent his disciples, his followers, to ask him a question. John, the rock star, the one who knows it all, who heard from God, spent his whole life preparing for what he was doing. Here's his question for Jesus. He says, are you the one who is to come? Or should we expect someone else? You know what we call this? Doubt. Doubt. Of all the people, there is no better example of someone who shouldn't doubt. His parents told him, from the time he was a child, he made vows to prepare for what he was doing. He knew Jesus growing up. He knew he was different. He claimed he had a moment where God showed him and literally said to him, that's the one. God. Like, I don't know what that sounded like, what that was like, what that experience felt like. But now he's got questions. And so to like lay the foundation for this series, like where we need to start is in knowing if you have doubts, you're not alone. You're not the first. There is no one, like at this point in Jesus' life, no one has been on board with what he's doing longer than John. No one should be more confident than John. No, this guy's eating bugs in the wilderness because he's on board with what Jesus is doing. And yet all of a sudden, he, like this rock star, superstar, started the whole thing. Thousands, hundreds of people coming out to him because of what he's teaching. It's now like, I'm not even sure. And you know why? It's because he's in prison. All of a sudden, there's a lot on the line. Like all of a sudden, I'm sure when the people are coming out by the multitudes, like, oh, that's John, let's go see him. Let's get up front. I want to see if he's gonna dunk me under the water. And he's got all this popularity and things are going so well. I'm sure it was like easy to just think, of course, I know what I'm saying. Of course, this is the real thing. It's going really well, right? But when he's surrounded by his prison walls, and now his life's on the line, he really could lose his life for what he says he believes. All of a sudden, he's totally not sure. Sometimes we are not aware of the doubts that we have until we have to put our weight on them, until we need to lean on them. Like not too long ago, we went to, my family, we went to go see our in-laws in Virginia. And we went to this place, it was called Compass. It was like basically this indoor little amusement park. There's games, great crane thing, great, lots of ways to lose money. And there's this indoor zip line. And I look up at it, and it's indoors, it's not that high. And I'm like, okay, I like adrenaline, I like a rush, I'm like, but it looks like it's not that high, it'll be a waste of money. Well, my daughter was like, I want to do that. And I was like, okay, great. So we could both spend $12. And we did. And so we climb up to the top of this thing, they like strap me in with the harness, and I'm just like, this is whatever it is. And there's a little ropes course we gotta do, we're balancing, climbing. And then we get to the zip line, we're at the top, and she's like, okay, you go first. And I get to the end, and there's a little guy there who's, making sure everybody's buckled in. He's like, all right, just walk to the end of the platform and just step off. And I was like, do step off or don't step off? And he's like, no, just walk off. Like it's nothing. And all of a sudden, like I'm looking up at the thing that's holding me, the chain's only as strong as the weakest link, right? And I'm like checking my harness. This thing, I didn't give a second thought to, but all of a sudden I've got to put my weight on it. And now the doubts rise to the surface. And this is often why doubts show up in our lives, in your life down the road. When you never saw them coming, you might have walked in thinking that's not intimidating, but you find yourself there and you've got to put your weight on it, and now you're not totally sure. Like maybe you were so confident God had your future in his hands, but you just lost your job. Or you didn't get into the school you wanted to go to. Or you haven't met the person you were hoping to meet. Or maybe you were once so confident that God was good, that he really cared. But then someone you love was diagnosed with something. Or you found out something about somebody. And it turned your world upside down. Maybe right now, today, you're not where you thought you would be. And maybe it feels like prison walls. And it's brought doubt to the surface. If that's you, you're not the first. You're not alone. John the Baptist doubted. when all he could see was his prison walls. And so, okay, well, what's Jesus gonna say to this, right? I mean, that's gotta be pretty hurtful. This is your guy, it's his cousin John. He was with you from day one. Like, he knew what you were before you knew what you were. Probably. And so Jesus has John's followers in front of him, and they want an answer. There's a crowd listening like, oh my goodness, like, what did they just say? And Jesus replies, he says this. Jesus replied, he said, go back and report to John what you hear and see. He says, the blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed. He says, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. He says, blessed is anyone who doesn't stumble on account of me. Now, like, for a long time, I would read that. And so they they turn away. There's our answer. So we got to tell John, you know. A long time, I would hear that and be like, okay, so Jesus is flexing his muscles here. You know, this is like, it's like if you ask an athlete, are you any good? And he's like, look at my stats, right? The blind, they see. You know, can you argue with that? Like a taunt, like, duh, John, really? Really, at this point, this is what you're doing? But that's not at all what he's saying. Jesus is actually quoting a chapter in the book of Isaiah, which was part of John's Bible. In fact, it's the same book where John believes there's a verse about him in it. And so he knows it pretty well. It's in Isaiah 35. You can read it for read it for yourself if you want. It says, tell those who fear, the blind will see, the lame will walk. There's someone who's coming who's going to do A, B, C, and D. And like, your joy will be restored. He is speaking to John in a way that John would understand. He's not just throwing an empty Bible verse at him. He's not like listing his stats. John knew that and knew that section, especially that part, that book very well. And just like, okay, this is what's going to alleviate his concerns. This is how John needs to hear it. He speaks to him in a way that he will understand. Tell those who fear, you're going to be all right. This is the proof. And Jesus is saying, this is what's happening, John. That would have been exactly what John needed to hear. Instead of criticism, for like his most loyal supporter questioning him publicly, Jesus responds with compassion. Let me, like, as if to say, I get that. I get it. All you see right now is your prison walls. I get that. I get that. And here's what you need from me. And so he gives it to him. He gives him compassion. I don't know about you, but that's never the way I feel when I doubt. I'm never like, oh, I don't know, but God loves me. Right? There's this feeling like, well, here I am again. He's probably disappointed with me. He knows my doubts. And so I like try not to even think them because I don't want to feel the way that I feel every time that I doubt. I want to feel the shame, the guilt, the disappointment, the heaviness, the discouragement. And yet Jesus responds not with criticism. He's not the one dropping the hammer. He's not the one beating him up. He gives him compassion. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so now, okay, so John, he loves John. John's his cousin, right? He gives him exactly what he needs. But now he's got to do a little damage control, right? I mean, he's got a crowd. Everyone just heard the question. It does not look good for you when your most loyal supporter questions you in front of everyone. John was the one who came bearing witness. And now his testimony is pretty shaky with all the doubt. And if you're into law, if you're a lawyer, right, you know, if you have a witness that comes up and blows up your case, the best thing you can do is get people to question the credibility of the witness, right? That's all you got. And so if I'm Jesus and I've got all these people, some of them used to be John's disciples, John's followers, and now they've switched camps and gone to Jesus. And so you know they're thinking, oh, if John's not sure, should we question whether or not we should be with him. Jesus has a million reasons to just totally destroy John's credibility in front of everyone. And here's what Jesus says. He turns, he looks at the crowds. It says, as John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. He says, what did you go out into the wilderness to see? Out where John was? Remember that? Remember when the hundreds of thousands of people were going out to see John? What did you go to see when you went out there? A reed swayed by the wind? No? He says, if not, what did you go out to see? You see a man dressed in fine clothes. We know John didn't have fine clothes. No. Those who wear fine clothes are in King's Palace. It's not out in the Jordan River baptizing people. He says, then what did you go out to see? Another question. Where are you going with this, Jesus? He says, a prophet? Like someone sent with God's authority to speak on behalf of God? Yes. I tell you, and more than a prophet. He says, this, John, this is the one about whom it is written. In the Bible, in their version of the Bible, it says, I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before you. This is the verse. This is one of the verses about John. He's like, that's who you went out to see. And this is my favorite part. He says, truly I tell you, among those born of women, that's everybody just about, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. What? In a moment where everyone else would have destroyed his credibility, in a moment where it would have been smart for his own sake to have the crowd questioning the legitimacy of John the Baptist, Jesus doesn't question it, he confirms it. It's as if he's saying, in case what you just heard is causing you to question whether or not this guy is the real thing, make no mistake, he's totally legit. He's with me. He's my guy. It's as if he's saying, like, your doubts don't discredit your faith. Even John the Baptist, surrounded by prison walls. Jesus could have been like, all right, everybody, now listen, John's having a really tough time. Maybe he's not who you thought he was. Maybe, I don't know, he's kind of losing his marbles. He's not on board anymore. He has every reason to just throw him away. But instead, he confirms who he is. If you got doubts right now, if you're struggling, maybe that's what you need to know. Your doubts don't discredit your faith. Your faith, or Jesus would say, your doubts about God don't change his feelings about you. In John's darkest, ugliest, most broken moments, Jesus looked at him and was like, he's mine. That's my guy. He's still with me. In case what you just heard has caused you to question that. The resounding message of this story and what you need to know is that it's okay. It's okay to doubt. If John, who had been told by God himself, that's the one. And later on, John goes into struggles and is like, I don't know if that's the one. And Jesus comes over and is like, all right, I know you're doubting, but you're still cool with me. If it's okay for John to doubt, it's okay for you to doubt. Or what we could say is, for the sake of this series, when we're talking about what to do with doubts, be aware of your doubts. Voice them, like John did. But don't be ashamed of them. Don't feel guilty. Don't beat yourself up. Because when we're ashamed of our doubts, what do? We like push them, suppress them, quiet. Like, I don't believe that, but I'll just like shut it up and I'll pretend, right? And we just like keep going and going and hope it doesn't come up. Hope someone from the front or in that song, they don't mention a thing that I'm really struggling with right now to wrap my head around. So we just suppress. And you know what happens eventually? Eventually that explodes. And what started as a small doubt turns into you leaving everything. And then you go home and write a blog about how long you were pretending for because it's all a big hoax. Because somewhere along the line, it was communicated to you, whether intentionally or on accident, that it was not okay to have doubts. And if, like, when you're reading this stuff, when you're hearing this stuff, you got to think, why is this in there? Why, like, this doesn't help the case for Jesus that his most loyal supporter is doubting him. Like, why would they put that in there? Unless he wanted you to know you're going to have doubts too. If John's going to, you're going to, and it's okay. It's okay when you doubt. When you doubt, be aware of them, but don't be ashamed of them. And so here's where we'll close. I'll ask the band to come up here, and then we'll wrap it up. Some of you have been beat up over the past few years. Like you're surrounded by what feel like prison walls. I mean, maybe literally prison walls. Or maybe something recently has beaten you up. Maybe you gotten bad news, a diagnosis. Maybe you heard something. Maybe something happened in your family. Maybe you heard something from one of your kids. Maybe you're sitting right now in a place you did not think you were going to be sitting. And it's brought doubts to the surface. The worst thing you can do is be ashamed of those doubts. Maybe you never had to put your weight into what you believe, and now you do. You got a choice. You can suppress them and you can pretend, or you can be aware. Choose, like, to not be ashamed of them. And what I think you'll see, even over the next few weeks, is that your struggle with doubt can actually feel like a journey with God, not one apart from him. And you can come out better, stronger, more grounded than when you went in. But that won't happen if you're beating yourself up because you're doubting when life beats you up. And so for the next few weeks, we're gonna wrestle through some of these things together. What I would love for you to do, in fact, if you wanna jump into this series with 2 feet, to go home today and write down some of your doubts, some things you really struggle to believe. Write them out. Put them on your nightstand. Bring them with you to church. Be aware of them, and we'll wrestle through them together. We'll talk about some tools that will help you to navigate these doubts. But through all of it, through every struggle, every question, every doubt, what you need to know is that even in your darkest moments, Jesus looks at you still and says, He's with me. Like that's my guy. She's my girl. She's mine. Your doubts about God don't change his feelings about you.